Good afternoon, everyone. Good to see you all. I'm seriously appreciating everyone just showing themselves on Zoom. I'm extremely grateful to be here with all y'all. I'm looking forward to a fruitful event, and I'd like to welcome all of you to the first town hall of this year, and also the second year of this pandemic, as hopefully we're approaching an endemic. Communities of color still need a lot of support and continue to need resources. I want to pause really quickly, and I ask all of us if we could please put our heads down, if we can give 5 seconds in support of peace in Ukraine, and for that to end as soon as possible. So if we could please do that for 5 seconds, I thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that. Today is the 29th day of that invasion and a month out from when it started. So let's continue to pray for peace and that ends as soon as possible. I think more than ever, it is imperative. It is morally imperative. And I know I said this a few weeks ago to some of the La Familia team, that we are living by our values. And here at La Familia, they are belonging, social justice, self-determination, integrity, and partnership. And with that, I'd like to do a land acknowledgement. While working for a more equitable future, we also must consider historic and present day inequities associated with place. In that vein, we want to acknowledge the native lands that we sit on. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Jason Toro, Director of Reentry Programs here at La Familia.
Thank you, Aaron. I appreciate having the honor to be able to talk about the native lands that we're sitting on. So everywhere we go in the Bay Area, we are on Ohlone land. There are over 50 different landholding groups of the Ohlone people, and we currently live and work on the lands of the Muwekma, the Ramaytush, and the Lisjan Ohlone. The Muwekma Ohlone lived historically in the Mission Dolores, which is parts of San Francisco. It's a number of regions in San Francisco, as well as Santa Clara and San Jose. The Ramaytush historically lived in the San Francisco Peninsula, which is San Mateo County and parts of San Jose. And closer to us are the Lisjan Ohlone, who inhabited the 5 Bay Area counties of Alameda, Contra Costa, Solano, Napa, and San Joaquin. Turn it back to you, Aaron.
Thank you for that, Jason. I really want to define today and talk about place-based and kind of set the tone for what we're going to be experiencing today with our fabulous lineup of speakers. So defining factor of place, one's community, both social and physical environment, and determining accessibility to resources and opportunities. This has the greatest impact on life and outcomes. Addressing these issues must start at the neighborhood level and guided by residents themselves. I think my partners at Street Level Health Project would agree with me. Now, growing theme in this field is just that, widespread understanding that our most pressing issues must be addressed by working together in partnership. Practice adopted by many, including community-based organizations, affordable housing developers, private foundations, and local governments. Areas that have seen this coalition building trend are housing safety, food access, healthcare, education, economic development. Most recently, pandemic response. And I'm sure some of those analogies will come up a little bit later. Where La Familia is applying place-based approach. This work by our strong people, our fierce people, our essential people is being applied across the county. There are so many individuals and organizations committed to place making in formal and informal collaboration, such as South Hayward, Unincorporated, Alameda County, and Fruitvale. We have put the partners that are formally in partnerships with on screen here, and I'm going to read through them to acknowledge all of them. All right, so for South Hayward, Eden Youth and Family Center, Glad Tidings Community Development Corporation, South Hayward Parish, Regional Pacific Islander Task Force, in the unincorporated area, Eden United Church of Christ, Resource for Community Development, My Eden Voice, which we help co-create, Regional Pacific Islander Task Force, Village Connect, Ashland Community Association, San Lorenzo, Hayward Acres, Mobilize. And I do want to acknowledge that I may not be able to cover everyone today, but we want to make sure we capture as many of our partners as possible. And in Fruitvale, the Unity Council, East Oakland Collective, Tribe, Homies Empowerment, Street Level Health Project, Centro Legal de la Raza, Peralta Hacienda, Spanish Speaking Citizens Foundation, Native American Health Center, La Clínica, El Tímpano, Courage, Ella Baker Center, Prospera, St. Elizabeth's Catholic Church, and Latinx Center for Excellence. Our goals recently in these collaboratives of work have been: pandemic has shown us a need of greater than we've imagined. Communities that had experienced systemic barriers and longstanding inequities were now faced with crises. Many residents and families are still in the midst of recovering, still in an emergency situation, work shortage, health, catching up on bills, and covering rent. Federal dollars that were allocated to recovery still have not reached the communities that they were meant to support. Limited opportunity to recover, American Rescue Plan money that we still want to see more in our communities, transparency and funding, sense of urgency. With that, the purpose for this conversation, to elevate this idea that place in the physical social environment, it is our communities. They are active living places with real people. The dynamics of each of these communities have been shaped by past policy and planning decisions. What we choose to do in these places impacts not only the people living there, but for future generations to come. We need to celebrate wins of resident leaders, acknowledge the work of each direct service provider doing the work on the ground, elevate the coalition building that has persisted throughout a global pandemic, appreciate the commitment of all of our partners, and raise the idea that there are opportunities for each of us to be able to get involved in shaping our communities. With sincere gratitude, I'd like to thank all of you for your attendance, and I'd like to hand it now over to our fabulous moderator, La Familia's very own Chief Strategy Officer, Jennifer Ellis. Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. And thank you for bringing us into this moment. As Aaron said, I'm Jennifer Ellis. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer here at La Familia. And I have to tell you, there's literally nowhere else in the world I would rather be than here with you having this conversation this afternoon. As the moderator for this event tonight, I get to issue a couple of reminders. The biggest one is, like our movements, this event is only as powerful as the energy that we bring to it. So if you are at a place physically and emotionally to be on camera, we invite you to do that. We want to see all of your faces and see your cheers and your acknowledgements. Even if you aren't on camera, please actively use your emoji reactions, be in the chat. We've already got a really great chat dialogue started because that's what's going to help us co-create the spirit in the room tonight. To help you launch this, I am going to ask you to do just a couple of seconds of reflection. And the reflection is, how does the neighborhood you currently live in shape your life? Or said differently, what was the first time that you realized that your neighborhood was different than the one next door or the one across the city? So I'm going to ask us just to reflect for maybe 10 sentences, type one sentence into the chat and hit send whenever you're ready. I appreciate the thought that people are putting into their responses. Press send whenever you're ready. Okay, someone says culture. Yeah, there we go. We're picking up momentum. I love that. So the chat is our space. It's the space where we get to be in community with one another. And so I'm so grateful. A lot of diversity. There's a lot of emphasis there, and I just want to welcome that. So So I want to ground ourselves in why place matters, not just in general, but to us, right? Because we are the makers of this moment. And I also wanted to acknowledge that a lot of us have different levels of exposure to these ideas. And so in order to get us all on the same page, we want to share this video produced by the California Endowment that shows us plainly not only that place matters, but how much place matters. This is A Tale of Two Zip Codes.
What determines how long we'll live? Is it what we do? Is it who we are? Actually, when it comes to predicting how long you'll live, your zip code is more important than your genetic code. Here's how this works. Meet Deb and Maria. They both have jobs, they're around the same age, they're both married, and they both have 2 kids. Deb lives in A-Town, while Maria lives in Bville, less than 1 mile away. They're similar in so many ways, but here's the thing. On average, residents of Bville will die more than 15 years sooner than the residents of A-Town. Why? Because where you live is about more than just your address. It's about your opportunities. For example, Deb and Maria's access to healthy options is really different. In A-Town, Deb's family is surrounded by healthy food options, including farmers markets, specialty shops, and grocery stores. The air in A-Town is cleaner and fresher, and there are lots of safe, clean parks where Deb can exercise and her children can play. A-Town has good public schools for Deb's kids and easy access to emergency and preventive health care. On the other hand, Bville has broken, badly lit sidewalks, and the parks are unsafe. The air is filled with truck exhausts from the nearby highway. And for food options, Maria's only choices are Bville's many liquor stores, fast food places, or convenience stores. The schools in Bville are overcrowded and undersupported. And even if Maria can get her kids into better schools far away, she needs to figure out how to get them there without access to a car. So for Maria, having to juggle so much to find healthy options can be an overwhelming source of chronic stress, which is a serious health risk factor. In fact, for all the residents of Bville, chronic stress drives health problems like obesity, diabetes, asthma, and heart disease. How did A-Town and Bville get so different? Well, in many cases in cities and towns across California, the root cause was racial and economic discrimination. Over the generations, poor white people and people of color were pushed to less desirable parts of town, where banks refused to lend money, businesses left, jobs too, schools declined, and the neighborhood crumbled. Everyone who could move away did. And what's more, when communities like A-Town and Bville are so unequal, Bville isn't the only one that suffers. Because it turns out that not only is your zip code a predictor of how long you'll live, so is what country you live in. Countries with the greatest income inequality have the lowest life expectancy. So even Americans like Deb, who are white, insured, college-educated, and upper income, die younger than their peers in other countries. In fact, our life expectancy is 43rd in the world, and that number is slipping. In the end, our biggest health risk may actually be inequality, and extreme inequality hurts us all. So what do we do? Well, if we're all going to be healthier, we don't just need to help the folks in Bville beat the odds. We need to change the odds for everyone. And that's what we're doing. There's a movement happening. We're Californians. We don't follow. We lead. We are building the power to make health happen in communities across the state. We are coming together to build one California, a smarter, more inclusive and equitable state that creates health and opportunity for all of us. Join us. To learn more, visit buildinghealthycommunities.org.
So I'm glad we got to share that. I saw your comments coming through in the chat. And you're exactly right. I love this video because it's so easy to use, right? To get people on the same page, I just send the YouTube link and I say, this is what I'm talking about. This is why it's important. And so we will make sure everyone gets the materials, and please distribute widely. So I want to talk a little bit about how I came to the idea of place. Early in my life, I saw how very unfair things were. The house I lived in versus the house my cousins lived in, for example. But it wasn't until I was about 24 that someone shared with me that local issues require local solutions. And I will say that for me, it was like lightning, like, oh, right? Because when we say local issues, we don't just mean that stop sign down the street that's been broken, right? We mean that family member who's struggling with addiction and really needs some help. We're not talking about, like, am I allowed to blow off fireworks in front of my house on 4th of July, right? But also that unsheltered guy who's wandering around downtown, can we find him a place to stay that is going to stick? And these aren't just federal problems or state problems or county problems, right? Where we just throw our hands up. These are actually some things that we can co-create solutions for. And I will say that that message to me early in my career, that was powerful. So I have pulled this thread through how I've approached my work my whole career. And I'm grateful that when I found this home here at La Familia, it was a conversation that others were having too. La Familia is increasingly committing to looking at these things, to looking at the historical and structural realities that have shaped these communities into what we see today. And we are taking action to build local power, to build something better, something that is more aligned with our values. And as we said earlier, it is not just us, it is our partners. It is powerful, fearless people who are doing this work with us. And that includes our keynote speaker tonight, Richard Raya. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Richard, and then we'll hand the mic over to him. Richard has served as the Director of Mission Promise Neighborhood at Meta for nearly 4 years, working with community partners to improve educational results for San Francisco's children and help families with their income, housing, and health needs. Now, as Meta's Chief Strategy Officer, he is using this on-the-ground experience to inform equitable recovery efforts that other communities are embarking upon. Richard is also a board member for SPUR and a member of the Executive Committee for End Child Poverty in California. Prior to this, Richard was the Chief of Staff for Oakland City Council members, Oakland City Council member, and the Director of Administration for the Alameda County Department of Public Health. Richard's great-great-grandparents were indigenous Yaquis who came to the Bay Area after fighting in the Mexican Revolution. His parents worked as farm workers in Northern California and came of age during the Chicano movement. They laid the foundation for him to earn a BA and a master's in public policy from UC Berkeley. He's accompanied on this journey by his urban planner wife, 5 sons, and their rescue pit bull named Dazzle. Help me offer a warm welcome to Richard, and please keep your thoughts and your aha moments and your energy coming as we welcome him. Thank you so much, Richard.
Jennifer, thank you for that welcome. And wow, that's the first time my dog has ever been shouted out. So I appreciate that. And I know he would appreciate it if when I tell him later, I think he will appreciate it. So I just want to say the energy on this call is great. It's great to be in community with you all. I want to thank Jennifer for inviting me. I want to thank Sophia for doing a lot of the legwork behind the scenes to make this happen. And it's just great to be in community with you all because my work is primarily in San Francisco's Mission District. So it's good to be on the other side of the Bay because we're all in this together. The magnitude of what we're working on requires us to all be in this together. So La Familia, Street Level Health Project, Resilient Fruitvale, and my organization, Mission Economic Development Agency, and others, over the past few years, we have been doing heroic work, both before and during the pandemic. And we've done this by addressing the massive inequities in our communities, but also by tapping into the power of our community, our place. It's heroic work, but we shouldn't have to be heroes. The community capacity, the community magic that we channel should be fully funded and part of an ongoing racial justice strategy for both the Bay Area and the country. It's good government and it's the right thing to do. It's the human thing to do. But before I get into that, let me share what brought me to this work. So as you heard a little bit about this, but I am a fourth generation Bay Area native. My great grandparents were indeed Yaqui, the indigenous people who lived in northern Mexico, in and around the Arizona border, since time immemorial. And actually the Yaqui people continue to live there, despite centuries of persecution and attempted genocide and shifting borders imposed by European colonists. So as you heard, my great grandparents, after fighting in the revolution, were part of the great post-revolution migration to California to escape the devastation of war. And they settled in East San Jose more than 100 years ago. And their children became farm workers in what was then called the Valley of the Heart's Delight. As children, my parents worked in the fields alongside adults during the summer. And during the school year, they were punished for speaking Spanish in class. But they came of age during the Chicano movement. They adopted the Cholo style and marched with Dolores Huerta and Cesar Chavez for equal rights. But neither of them graduated from high school. And as teenage parents, their marriage didn't last. My mother, my little brother, and I, we lived in poverty. We were homeless at times. And sometimes we had to sleep in our car in downtown San Jose. We moved around so much that I also dropped out of school, just like my parents. One day, my mom, who was a brave woman who always challenged norms and expectations for women, and who committed herself to lifelong reading and learning, went to a community college to get a 6-month certificate to become an office clerk. After she took the diagnostic test, the counselor told her scores were so high, she should instead try to complete a 2-year program and transfer to a 4-year university. And on that day, I think she was actually more happy for me than she was for herself. She came home and told me that I also had a chance to go to college. Neither of us had known about this second chance opportunity. So we ended up going to community college at the same time, my mom and I. She transferred to UC Santa Cruz and I transferred to Berkeley. And from that moment on, I dedicated my life to making sure that our society became more fair, more just, and that more people from my community, people like my mom and me, didn't fall through the cracks, that they had what they needed to succeed and to take their rightful place in society as equal and contributing members. I spent the first 10 years of my career in government, and I was disheartened by the slow nature of bureaucracy, by how removed it seemed from the community I came from, the community it was supposed to be serving. I didn't like the silos in government that prevented agencies from working collaboratively. I was also turned off by the lack of accountability. We seem to be spending a lot of money, but not working toward measurable results in many cases. And I think most importantly, I didn't see a transformative vision for ending poverty. So like many of you on this call, I joined the nonprofit sector. And although it's called nonprofit, it ended up being very profitable for my spirit, at least, as I'm sure it has been for you. I landed in the Mission District, one of the epicenters of Latino culture in the Bay Area, but also one of the epicenters for income inequality and displacement. And I'm sure all of you have been there, the home of Carlos Santana, Galeria de la Raza, Balmy Alley, Dia de los Muertos procession, and of course the Bay's Carnaval celebration. There is magic in place. The Mission is a neighborhood of more than 50,000 people packed into 1.5 square miles. This density only adds to the vibrancy of the community, and it's also part of what makes it so attractive to high income earners. Traditionally, it was a working class gateway community for Latino immigrants, but beginning with the dot-com boom, we saw more than 1/3 of our population displaced from the neighborhood. 10,000 Latinos were displaced from the Mission. We used to be the majority of the community, but that is no longer the case. 10 years ago, we responded collectively. The Mission District was facing exorbitant housing prices, families working multiple low-wage service sector jobs just to afford monthly rent, high levels of trauma stemming from immigration status, and inability to be home with children because of work. And we saw disparities in educational outcomes. So we applied for a federal Promise Neighborhood grant, which is from the Department of Education. We became one of about a dozen cities to get one of these grants. It was inspired by the Harlem Children's Zone. And it came with the belief that all children had the ability to succeed in school if they had the right supports along the cradle to career continuum. So we brought the community together to provide these supports in a very coordinated, collaborative way. With our $30 million 5-year grant, we formed Mission Promise Neighborhood and became the quarterback for a team of 15 community organizations in the mission, providing a seamless web of support for low-income families. We coordinated early learning centers, community health clinics, the school district, and the city. We subgranted much of this huge grant to our community partners so that we could come together and create a common agenda, a referral tool, data sharing agreements, and a results-based accountability plan, or an RBA plan. We also created parent leadership academies to tap into the community wisdom. It was the neighborhood parents who told us that the #1 way for their kids to do better in school was for them to have more affordable housing. And it was these parents' voice that pressured the city into creating innovative new affordable housing programs, which allowed our organization to go from being just a service provider to also an affordable housing developer, with now having more than 1,400 units built or in the pipeline. We connected students and their families to affordable housing, mental health services, tenants' rights, small business loans, job training, tax assistance, and more. Just last year, we helped families secure $5 million in tax refunds. And over the years, we helped families complete 26,000 affordable housing applications. Over time, we saw the kinder readiness rate increase 30 points to 71%. We saw the graduation rate increase almost 20 points to 86%. And we saw the rate of families having a medical home increase from 60% to 80%. But when COVID first arrived, all of this progress was put in jeopardy. It hit our community the hardest in San Francisco. Although Latinos only made up 15% of the city's population, they were 50% of the COVID positive cases, 50, because of their crowded living conditions and service sector jobs that couldn't be done from home, as you all know. The trust that our Promise Neighborhood Network had built with the community and the networked approach that we had developed with other agencies put us in a position to reach these families and to work with the city to play a central role in distributing emergency resources to these families, including $8 million in income replacement funds to 6,000 families and $9 million in relief funds for nearly 300 small business owners. We came together as a community, a village, to provide for our neighbors who were in greatest need. I know that many of your organizations did the same, and the city and philanthropy needed us to get it done. And together, we all built a new muscle, a collaboration muscle, and we created fast, effective systems connecting philanthropy, government, and community. This muscle should not go away, even if the pandemic subsides, because income inequality and systemic racism will still be here. When a community backbone agency coordinates government investments and partner collaboration and channels the voice of residents and shows measurable results, this is good government. It's community driven, it's collaborative, data informed, and accountable. And it's actually more than good government. It's also just being good humans, helping our neighbors. So these types of highly funded community backbone agencies like Mission Promise Neighborhood should not be boutique projects for a few lucky neighborhoods. They should be normalized. I think government must evolve at this moment in time to be more connected to community and work with community backbone agencies as conduits, connectors, and drivers of programming and policy, and not just in times of crisis. This type of community capacity building and catalytic investment especially makes sense in communities of color with a legacy of discrimination, like redlining and other forms of systemic racism described in the video we just watched. Elected officials must show leadership to make this happen. I think Obama did it when he created Promise Neighborhoods. I'm not sure, though, that bureaucrats have the power to develop such things. I do think it requires elected officials. And I think that locally, Assemblymember Bonta is taking a policy leap similar to Obama with her It Takes a Village Act, or AB 2517. It would dedicate $90 million in the state budget to fund Promise Neighborhoods or similar place-based efforts across California. I think many of your coalitions would be eligible for this funding if it was successful. My org helped to draft this legislation in coalition with Hayward Promise Neighborhood, End Child Poverty in California, Strive Together, and more. So the It Takes a Village Act will institutionalize, if successful, this type of community-led approach so that it's not limited to a few lucky neighborhoods, and so that it is scaled to reach more of our hardest hit communities. And I think that this new wave of promise neighborhoods and place-based initiatives could be the vanguard for a truly equitable recovery. So like the video said, we're Californians, we lead. But I'm not here to convince you to get behind a certain piece of legislation. A community-led recovery is bigger than one piece of legislation or one leader. It's a change in mindsets. It's a change in systems. It's a paradigm shift. As Jennifer said at the beginning, it's actually a movement. You and I, who are on place-based work, we already know this. And now is the time for us to build on our momentum, to build on the fact that government and philanthropy have now seen how essential we and our residents are to a functioning, fair society. And they have seen how large-scale, transformative investments can be part of a racial justice strategy in communities with legacies of inequity. So in closing, these types of investments are the right thing to do. They are the human thing to do. And it is the right time to do this. I just want to say thank you all for listening to me. And more importantly, thank you all for the powerful work that you do in our communities. It is an honor to work alongside you. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. If you could join me to give Richard some snaps and some applause and some reactions and some kudos in the chat, because I'm just so, so grateful that you're willing to spend this time with us today. Thank you so much. Also, I love that story about your mom. Like, thank you for sharing that with us. All right, so to move the conversation forward, also, I do just want to pause and acknowledge that we apologize for the lack of translation in this particular event. La Familia staff are stepping up and saying, hey, call me, I'll translate for you. And so thank you to the La Familia staff who have been translating in real time in the chat. I just want to appreciate you and appreciate that responsiveness.
Thank you, Teresita. I want to acknowledge that for translating. And if anyone does need translation, I can give my cell phone and provide translation services on the spot as well. So thank you, Teresa.
Yeah, thank you, Ilse and Freddie and Aaron for that. So to return to our conversation about place, or to continue our conversation about place, I want to better introduce you to the neighborhoods. And I know that Teresita is a proud resident of the unincorporated area, and we are so grateful to have her. The neighborhoods that we've chosen to spotlight tonight are the Fruitvale District of Oakland, South Hayward, and the urban unincorporated area with an emphasis on Ashland and Cherryland. And as you may know or may not know, these neighborhoods are similar in some ways. They all have deep histories, they all have good people, and even some of those good people have similar challenges. But they're also different in key ways. And I can't do justice to what makes these communities unique. And also, we want to make sure that you didn't hear just from me, just from the people on this panel, but from local people who call these communities home. And so with that, I'm pleased to present our video centering community voices.
I am from the South Hayward neighborhood over by the Southgate Elementary School.
I've been living in South Hayward now for over 18 years.
5 years.
21 years.
I've just lived everywhere, Walnut Creek, Concord, and it seems that Hayward is the place that I want to settle down and grow roots, which is why I've been here for so long.
La amistad que he agarrado con muchas amigas. He tenido mucha ayuda de parte de ellas, pero también sobre todo que he encontrado mucha ayuda de parte del distrito y de la ciudad aquí de Hayward.
I really like the area I live in. I like living in Hayward. It's nice and it's quiet. It's just it's a normal, lower middle class neighborhood, mostly working people, and just a lot of hardworking people and good people.
To be honest, I would like to see more patrolling, I guess, from police. I know right now they're short-staffed, but you know, once you get up to a certain point, we do have a lot of homelessness, and sometimes they do come to the park and they do scare the children. So it just, I mean, I know you can't avoid it, but it would be nice for the kids to feel a little bit more comfortable when they do come to the park. And I'm not against the homelessness, but it would be nice if they were to be rehomed instead of continuously be homeless.
I would like to see less people dumping their garbage out on the main road. I've already talked to the mayor about it, and they started doing more for cleaning up, but it continues.
La seguridad, sobre todo también para nuestros hijos. Yo sé cómo han tratado de quitar un poco el tiempo de los policías dando vueltas alrededor de la ciudad, pero pienso que más para las escuelas de nuestros niños. Se ocupa un poquito más de seguridad, donde puedan ellos sentirse seguros al caminar solos, porque hay mucho niño pequeño que camina solo hasta llegar a la escuela que le corresponde.
San Lorenzo, it's been my community for so long, and I've spent so many years helping out at the Little League. It's like San Lorenzo doesn't define who I am, but it's a large portion of who I am.
Good morning, my name is Janelle Ingram, and I am a longtime resident of the Ashland Unincorporated area.
Good morning, I'm from San Lorenzo, and we're unincorporated here in the Alameda County.
I think something unique is our location based off where we're at in the Bay Area.
There's a lot of home qualities here. I've seen neighbors come and go, I've seen businesses come and go, but it's a community.
I definitely would want to see more local business. Growing up down Bachman, there used to be businesses there, and they demolished those to build residence, which is great to house more people, and even the old Mervyn's parking lot, like growing up as a kid, I'd hear all these stories about, oh, the Mervyn's parking lot is where everyone would be in the San Lorenzo Theater. That was a huge thing that hasn't been occupied in so many years, and I would think we'd have more of an impact about what happens only here in San Lorenzo and be able to have more of a say.
I had pushed for maybe a Trader Joe's that was closer, something more healthful. There's a lot of restaurants, but nothing healthful. And when I first moved here, there was a lot of little shops. There was a Mervyn's actually right here, and they've torn those places down and haven't refilled them with anything. So there's just open spaces that are sitting there, and that's kind of sad to see.
I would like to see more affordable housing. As someone that lives in this area, I'd like to see more affordable housing. I'd like to see better health care. I'd like to see more parks, because those are things that I feel are necessary for this community to thrive. Those are things I feel like we need. Children need parks. Older adults need medical care. The head of households need to know that there's a good grocery store that they can go and get fresh fruits and vegetables. Those things, and that's why I feel like it's important to see those things in this community.
Like, they did build new apartments that are also an insane price if you want to buy, and just the reality of having a family here, like, it's back and forth from reality and a dream of make that sense of community that I used to be a part of and still a part of, and I'd really love for my, my future to continue in San Lorenzo.
I'm from Oakland, California. I live close by Fruitville, around 23rd Avenue.
Aquí en Oakland, en la Fruitville tengo como unos 5 años.
I am from the Fruitville neighborhood on 34th Avenue. 47 years, my whole life.
I actually like it. It's pretty calm, nothing pretty crazy going on. The neighbors are pretty cool.
This is where I grew up, born and raised. And my parents are across the street from me, so it's kind of nice to be around family.
Yo hasta ahorita tranquila, porque ahí donde vivo la posada está muy bien. El edificio está muy bien cuidado. La manager muy atenta, los que trabajan ahí muy amables, todo el personal que trabaja ahí muy amables todos. Pero pues todo lo que he vivido yo aquí en Oakland, pues gracias a Dios nunca me ha pasado nada.
What I would like to see, you know, when I grew up here, I was in my teens, I would be outside playing in the streets, not afraid of a vehicle passing by at 80 miles an hour, no way. Now we got a little issue with, you know, a lot of cars just coming up and down the block. I would love for my children to explore that, to be out and about, go out freely, feeling safe, you know, and not scared. That's what I would like to see. I would like for me to take it back to when I was growing up, you know, in my teen years. My mom and dad would let me ride my bike outside with no worry in sight. Now I can't do that with my kids. It's like, are you kidding? I'm gonna freak out.
I guess I would just like to see maybe people getting along more. You know, well, I guess it looks like less violence. I always, you know, see it happening here, or like just this morning, you know, I saw like a commotion going on between two drivers because they were like getting mad, and I guess I just want to see less of that happening. You know, that it's really pointless, and yeah, just less violence. One thing I always see on my street always is like sometimes cars, you know, they pass the stop sign, and you know, it's just always important to follow the rules of, you know, driving, and just to make it safe for everyone. For the little ones, you know, we're like role models to them, and they grow up to do what they see, you know.
A un conocido de allá mismo de donde yo soy, venían ellos de trabajar a la 1 de la mañana, venían de trabajar y ahí los asaltaron. Los golpearon con armas, no los balacearon, los golpearon con la arma y les quitaron sus cosas. Eran dos y de ahí salió la mamá y sale un niño, y pues ya ver el niño todo eso, que es a su papá y luego a otro señor que vive ahí. Entonces pues eso yo pienso que eso les afectó mucho, y una chamaca.
Well, yeah, there's like one specific thing that always, like, you know, every time I do decide to like take him to the park somewhere close by, I would show up and I would always see like a bunch of kids sitting there smoking pot, you know. And, you know, I take my kids to the park for them to like enjoy themselves, not for them to be running around smoke, you know. So that's one thing I wish they would like have someone watching the parks, maybe, you know, just to make it safer for the kids and, you know, things like that.
Es raro que se vea un carro de policía. Un cambio ahí de que hubiera más policía, de que pasaran más policías. No uno tras de otro, pero por allá cada 2 horas, cada 3 horas, o pasen en la mañana, pasen a mediodía, pasen al oscurecer, de que digan, ok, se vio esto otro, porque ahí no respetan. De día esa señora, me acuerdo, 2, 3 veces yo creo que fue, que la asaltaron a ella ahí, en pleno día. Hay policías, por ejemplo, cuando hay algo. Por ejemplo, como ahora que fueron a quitar los carros y todo eso ahí estaba la policía, pero que digas que está yendo policía, que se ve policía seguido pasando por ahí, eso, no. Es cuando hay algo, es cuando pasa la policía, pero casi no pasa policía por ahí.
Yeah, let's see some more snaps, some more love for that video. First thing, I want to show love to the residents, to our neighbors who were willing to stand up and represent their communities. Like, I'm so grateful that you were willing to do that. And I know that some of you are with us tonight, and thank you for joining us. I do want to second the kudos to Ray Casares, who's our communication manager here at La Familia. He and Sophia put that together in literally a week. So I'm so grateful for that. So we now have the great opportunity to introduce you to our panelists for tonight and to have a really deep conversation. And so these individuals, we welcome them here to talk about what they're seeing on the ground and what battles they're waging on behalf of their communities. And again, those communities are Fruitvale, South Hayward, and that unincorporated Alameda County, with an emphasis on Ashland and Cherryland. Sorry, I have to say the words Ashland, Cherryland a lot tonight. That's my bias, I'm sorry. So our panelists joining us are Gabriela Galicia, Sandra Macias, and Nestor Castillo. And I'm gonna tell you just a little bit about them before we jump in. So Gabriela Galicia is currently serving as the executive director at Street Level Health Project in Oakland, California. Since 2010, she's worked in different capacities and roles at Street Level Health Project. Prior to her role as executive director, she served as the Immigrant Rights and Empowerment Program Manager for 6 years. She pioneered and co-developed the now established Oakland Workers Collective, a day laborer program that creates a safe and empowering space for day laborers and low-wage workers. As a result of her tireless efforts, this program has gained visibility and recognition, becoming the singular long-term city-recognized day laborer program in Oakland and the only day laborer program recognized by the AFL-CIO on the West Coast. Gabriela is the first in her family to graduate from college and graduated from the University of California, Berkeley in December 2009 with a bachelor's degree in political science and a minor in ethnic studies with a concentration in Chicano studies. Recently, she's had the honor to be selected as one of 18 women to participate in the first cohort of the Leader Spring Women of Color 2020 Fellowship Program. Welcome, Gabriela. I would like to introduce you to our second panelist now, Sandra Macias. For the past 8 years, Sandra Macias has been a resident of and involved in the unincorporated area of Alameda County, working to give the community a voice and a seat at the table. She helped establish the Eden Area Municipal Advisory Council and mentors resident leaders. During the COVID-19 crisis, she worked with resident leaders who advocated for much needed testing sites, food and basic needs, vaccination sites, renter protections, and more. She joined the team at La Familia as the Equity Initiatives lead 3 years ago to expand on her hands-on work within the community. Sandra also hosts a local TV show, As Sandra, where she highlights local issues, politics, and resources, which is filmed and produced at the local studio she owns with her husband. Welcome, Sandra. And lastly, Nestor Castillo. Last but not least, of course. Nestor Castillo is a lecturer in the College of Ethnic Studies at San Francisco State University and at Cal State East Bay. He serves as the chair of the Alameda County Public Health Commission and is one of the founding directors of the Eden Community Land Trust. A quote that guides his work is, "The right to the city is not merely a right of access to what already exists, but a right to change it after our heart's desire." Welcome, Nestor. So please help me in welcoming all of our panelists tonight. All right, so I am going to kick off our questions. And the first couple of questions, one will be directed to each of our panelists, and then we'll open the conversation up a little bit. So the first one is to Gabriela. So Gabriela, how do you define the boundaries of Fruitvale or Resilient Fruitvale's work? And if you could speak on what is it like to be one of several high-need communities, both within the city of Oakland and in the county? And what are some of the structural barriers that make Fruitvale unique?
Yes, thank you, Jennifer, and happy to be here with everyone. Just a little bit about Street Level. We were founded in 2002, and we're really an Oakland community-based center, and we're dedicated to the well-being of uninsured, underinsured, and recently arrived immigrants. What I would say about being a participant with Resilient Fruitvale, which is a group of 17 different organizations that started really years ago in response to the Ghost Ship fire and then the disaster planning. But we really saw the need in the pandemic, as we heard earlier, to come together because of the slow response that we saw from government, right, city and county, to be able to provide the resources that our communities were needing at that time. One example in particular that stands out to me is just the lack of testing that was happening for COVID vaccine. We were one of the last neighborhoods, Fruitvale, to receive any resources to do testing. And yet, you know, a Resilient Fruitvale came together to host a major event in the summer of 2020 to be able to provide that for our communities while we were having the highest numbers of COVID-19. What I like about Resilient Fruitvale is that, you know, we've come together as large anchor institutions, smaller budget, grassroots organizations, and really coming together not just to think about the effects of Fruitvale, but beyond, and recognizing that a lot of our community, which we'll get into more, into the next question that has been gentrified out of the Fruit Belt and now living in East and Deep East Oakland. And so really our collaborative is really made up not just of Latinos and Spanish speakers, but it's a diverse group of multicultural leaders, organizations, and communities really coming together. I would say for street level, what we see is mostly recently arrived immigrants, day laborers, low income to no income, unstable housed, unhoused, uninsured communities. And many report, coming to Fruitvale all the way from East Oakland, Deep East Oakland, because there's limited resources or organizations that speak their language, that look like them, and know that there's trusted organizations in the Fruitvale that they can that identify their needs and they can identify with and are here to support them. And some of the barriers that we encounter, the community encounters really is the language access, as it was called out in the chat, right? We see the growing population of the indigenous community, the Maya Mam community from Guatemala, and other refugee and immigrant communities moving into this neighborhood, because this is, one of the neighborhoods that feel safe for immigrant communities. The lack of access to affordable housing, the lack of access to healthy foods, access to safe and dignified jobs. And so really this affects the social determinants of health and really has been exacerbated even further because of the pandemic. These issues already existed prior to the pandemic. This is not something that's new, but is just, has come to light for many people that didn't have had the privileges not to think about this. So really the leadership of RF has come together and forged new partnerships at times. For example, Street Level and La Familia, organically through this have started to do a lot of work together, holding vaccine pods where the people are at the street corner, literally where day laborers are waiting for work. And we have been the model here in Alameda County to do this work and even have provided leadership around this to public health and county. But we know there's still a lot of inequities that exist. And so we continue to deepen our relationships as organizations in Resilient Fruitvale and working through some of the challenges. We have our successes, but we also have, restorative justice that we need to do as communities and as organizations. And at the end of it, all of this is really the common goal is to fight for the inequities that continue to exist and for the redistribution of wealth into this neighborhood.
Thanks, Gabby. That was so well said. I really appreciate you getting us kicked off. I'm going to make the next question to Sandra, and give me just a second so I can spotlight you, Sandra. All right, you look spotlighted to me, but we'll figure it out. What does it mean to be unincorporated, and how does that play out in organizing and decision-making for your community?
Well, I'm going to go ahead and start off with what unincorporated means, because that's always the start of our conversation, whether it's with residents that don't actually know that they live in unincorporated, which is very, very often the case. Most of the time, folks think they live in either Hayward or San Leandro. And what unincorporated is we're not actually a city or a town. We're actually governed by Alameda County. So we are, we identify ourselves by our community names. And so we have Ashland, Cherryland, Hayward Acres, San Lorenzo, which is one that you might recognize for reasons I'll get into. Castro Valley is also an unincorporated area, which might surprise you. And then there's also Fairview. And what we call that is the urban unincorporated, because often unincorporated areas are areas that are more rural, that are sometimes outside in the edges of our cities, but urban unincorporated means we're right there in the middle. And so what that means is that we don't actually have a city government or any city structures to guide our areas. We don't have a mayor, we don't have a police department, we don't have a library, we don't have any of those things. All those things are provided by the county. And that also means that the governing body that makes decisions for us is the Board of Supervisors. And, that is really difficult, because what ends up happening is that a lot of the times, because, there are two supervisors, District 2, which is the Ashland, Hayward Acres area, and District 1, which is most of Ashland, Cherryland, Castro Valley, and Fairview, those are our elected officials. And so a lot of the times the rest of the board really defers to those two supervisors to make the decisions, because I think they reason that they are the ones that are most connected. And so that makes it really difficult to elevate issues, because we are really at the whim of our supervisors. And we have experienced this time right now where we have had two really supportive supervisors, and Supervisor Miley and also in Supervisor Wilma Chan, may she rest in power. But what we really experienced through her passing is that our gains are not safe. We have to kind of take our wins when we have them, and we have friendly supervisors, because we don't have the ability to make decisions for ourselves. A lot of the unincorporated area is governed by different committees. So we have these things called MACs, which are municipal advisory councils. They are advisory groups. And, you can really see the difference between communities, because, for example, Castro Valley has had a MAC since the 80s, which is why Castro Valley looks nice and has businesses and a chamber and all these wonderful things, versus Fairview that got one, I believe, in 2017, and the Ashland, Cherryland, San Lorenzo, Hayward Acres area, which was the EMAC, which we worked on. There's a lot of folks on here that worked on that with me. And so it just makes it really difficult, but it also gives us a little bit of power, and this untapped power that we actually were able to tap into and just make this monumental changes in the unincorporated area over the last 8-9 years. And I'm really proud of that, and I'm proud of all the folks that are here with me today that have helped me make that happen.
Thank you, Sandra. I really appreciate that knowledge that you shared with us. We're going to turn the next question to Nestor. Nestor, can you talk to us about some of the structural barriers present in South Hayward? How are the needs of South Hayward considered by the city of Hayward at large and at the county level?
Sure. Thanks, Jennifer, for that question. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to share this panel. I tend to be a little bit long-winded, so I'll try to be brief. And I think I come from a little bit of a different perspective than some of my fellow from my colleagues here comrades in the struggle, really, because I come from an educator's perspective, and I'm relatively new to the South Hayward area. I actually spent most of my time in the unincorporated area, but I think when it comes to structural barriers, I think they're all pretty clear when we take a look, right? All we have to do is kind of take a look outside and take it in, right? So if you're from South Hayward, you have a pretty clear idea of what some of those structural barriers are. And so I'm going to spend time just talking about one in particular, which is housing. Right? There's currently a housing boom that's taking place in South Hayward all along Mission. You just look out and you will see building after building after building that is being constructed, right? And the question that I think one has to ask themselves, and members of our community have to ask ourselves, is how much of that housing is affordable housing that's going on, right? How much of that housing is meant for residents of Hayward, right? Or is that housing that's currently being constructed going to new people who are not from this community, who haven't participated in building the sort of establishments that currently serve Hayward's residents, right? And so Richard talked a little bit about the Mission District. My family's from the Mission District. They're from Central America. They moved to the Mission District in the 80s, and part of that legacy of Latino activists was building the Mission District, just like Gabriela and others are building what is Oakland, right? And so who are those people that are currently building the institutions, the services that are being provided for the city of Hayward and South Hayward, right? And who will be benefiting from those services, right? As a result of, I think one of the topics that we might talk about is gentrification. And so we have to think about what are then the alternatives to the current way in which housing is being produced, right? And so that's why, I wear different hats, and I'll put on my community land trust hat for a second, because I think even when we talk about place mattering, right? And sort of access to opportunities, right? That language to me is still a little problematic, because it makes it seem like a lottery, right? And that if you got the right numbers and you happen to be in the right neighborhood, then you won the lottery of health, right? But the question is, even if we continue reducing the odds and making the odds better, there's still going to be groups of people who are vulnerable, and who are the unlucky drawers of that lottery. So that's why my perspective is a little bit around how is it that we change the actual the material circumstances in which people live. And I know I have to wrap up, so I'll end there.
No, Nestor, I so appreciate those points. And I think a lot of what you said is powerful and also visible. I think a lot of us have driven down Mission and we are seeing exactly what you're seeing. And I appreciate you posing the question, who is it for, right? And that kicks off our next question, which is actually about gentrification. And this, as I said, we're going to invite all of the panelists to weigh in on these ones. So here in the Bay Area, we know that the cost of living is already one of the most expensive regions in the nation, and that there are many people struggling, right? And at the same time, you have a lot of displacement. So Nestor, can you talk to us about talk to us more, I guess, about how gentrification shows up in the particular neighborhood you serve and how the residents are responding to those changes?
Yeah, I think, part of it, Richard posed a good question around developer fees and thinking about sort of, what are some of those alternatives to, or how we can incentivize the production of affordable housing. And I think from the land trust perspective, it's also securing the existing affordable housing that's already there, right? And so we know that there's families who benefit at a time that there was a benefit in which housing was relatively affordable, right? But because we're sort of, stuck with this model that makes housing a commodity, right, rather than a human right, because we talk about housing being a human right, but in reality, we treat housing as a commodity, as a commercial product that's sold for the highest cost, right? So it's also about finding ways and finding those tools that allow us to preserve the existing stock of affordable housing. And that's tough, right? Because that's a different mindset from the one that we're in which we talk about housing. We're not used to talk about the market and saying we want to decommodify housing and remove it from the market, right? Just like when we talk about, for example, public safety, we can't imagine public safety without, for example, the police, right? These are hard things to kind of imagine because we have to be able to sort of dream and construct alternatives. Right. And that's sort of the process that I'm interested in sort of how is it that we begin to construct those alternatives to the existing ways in which we do things. And so when we look at gentrification, right, when we look at where the centers of housing are being produced, right, there's a bunch of open space in South Haven, right? And but is that open space, is part of that open space going towards those communities that need it? And then there's a question of, I think in the video, someone brought up, housing is great, but there's also, as humans, right, we have other needs. We have needs for recreation. We have needs that need to be met. And so how is it that we provide, because gentrification is also about displacement and who gets to benefit from those things that exist in communities. And so how is it that we not only just provide housing and affordable housing, but also provide those other needs that we need as sort of human beings, right? I'll end there.
Thanks for that, Nestor. Gabby, how is this showing up in Fruitvale?
Yeah, definitely. I would like to start off by just saying, gentrification is a tool to drive communities of color out of different places. And I think to the question, I had the same question, right? Affordable housing for who, right? And what does that really mean? What does that really look like? Because even if we have affordable housing, we know the rents are really high. And that's what the number is based off when we talk about affordable housing. And let alone, there's a lot of requirements to affordable housing that leave out, for example, the undocumented communities. They can not participate in this programming. So they still have to continue to live in the deplorable, places and housing situations that they are doing now. As we see, that's why we have a lot of community members that live in 10, 20 people in a household. And that's the same reason why people contracted COVID, right? Not being able to have a place to isolate, not having a place to be able to rent for their own. Some people are renting literally a closet, a place of a living room, sleeping in their cars, couch surfing. So there's just many things that we see at street level and here in the Fruitvale district, and just because of the limited jobs, the affordability, and we see a lot of people moving to the east and deep East Oakland, which quite frankly, that's what's causing some of the tensions between residents, right? Once before, Deep East Oakland and East Oakland was all Black residents. And now we see, for example, in District 7, 58% is now Latino or Indigenous Maya Mam. And so what does that mean for our community residents? And they start to fight with each other. People are being pitted against each other because they think they're being driven out by another community. But really, if we look at the larger picture, it's gentrification. And it's happening, at a very rapid a time right now, and we really need to figure out how to protect that. Yet at the same time, many people come to Fruitvale because they know it's a welcoming area. We have a close-knitted immigrant community that knows, people have came in the 80s that, now invite others to come to this neighborhood because they feel safe, because they feel a community here. And we see this with the Guatemalan community. Years ago when I started at street level, there was, mostly people from Mexico, and now you hear indigenous languages in every corner of Fruitvale. So we have to recognize also the landscape and how it changes and it evolves.
Yeah, Gabby, I really appreciate that emphasis on the relationships and the networks and the community that exists. And when we displace people, we break that up, right? We make it actually harder for people to get by because your mom doesn't live down the street and can watch your kid anymore, right? And these are big deal issues. And so I really appreciate that emphasis kind of on community, on relationship. Sandra, I'm curious about how this shows up in the unincorporated area.
Thanks, Jen. I think that like for other areas, it's the high cost of rent has really had a huge impact on our families. It makes it really difficult for families to get by when, they're supposed to pay a third of their rent, a third of their income to rent, but really it's more like 60-70%. And so what ends up happening is a couple of things. So one, we have a lot of families that are moving to the Valley. And so what that does is it lowers our workforce, but also it has a huge impact on our schools. And so when you have a lot of families that are moving out of the unincorporated area, out of the Cherryland area, out of even Southern Castro Valley, what has happened is that you have families that are people that are coming in that don't have kids. And so what happens with our schools is that our kids, generate a certain amount of income, and you have less kids, that means the district has less income. And actually this year, my daughter's school in Castro Valley, the last school in Castro Valley, is going to be shut down because of declining enrollment due to gentrification. And so it shows up in all of these different ways that we don't necessarily think about. We think about the family that is being displaced, but we also have to think about how that affects us as a society and as a community. And what the residents in Unincorporated are doing is they're getting together and they are organizing. Just last night, we were at the Unincorporated Services Committee meeting. A lot of the folks that are here today were there at that meeting. We are standing up for renter protections because unlike our neighbors in San Leandro and in Hayward, the unincorporated area doesn't have renter protections outside of the emergency eviction moratorium. And so, for example, last night we want to potentially pass this rental inspection program that really addresses the deplorable conditions that a lot of the housing is in unincorporated, because without the municipal structures, you have a lot of homes that are not up to code, that were built in really kind of shady, non-planning department approved ways, but we don't have the government structures to deal with those things. And so what you have is a lot of families living in these really deplorable conditions. And so we are going to unincorporated services. We are going to the Board of Supervisors. We're calling them. We're really trying to raise these issues and really just unite and organize around getting renter protections for our community. But it's really challenging because of the way that things get passed in unincorporated. You have to go through all the community groups, you have to go through all the MACs, and then it comes down to 5 supervisors. And that is not always in our favor, especially when you have these big landlord lobbies. You have the Rental Housing Association, and they show up real deep. They really push back on these policies, but we are just working really hard to combat that and really promote that living with dignity is important. Families deserve to have quality housing and live with dignity. And so that is how our community is standing up for against gentrification. We are just showing up. We show up and we make change.
Yes, thank you, Sandra. And this segues so nicely into the next question, which is one of my very favorite things to talk about, which is this idea that traditional community engagement practices, right? The city puts out a survey, or we count the number of butts and seats, right? Sometimes they don't work with the folks that we're trying to really engage in what matters. And so if you could talk about what practices have been most effective at mobilizing residents to action, and also how can we create cultures of organizing that can sustain themselves in these three communities? And Gabby, we'll start with you.
Yeah, definitely. I think first I want to acknowledge that communities know how to organize, right? And it's not something that, you know, needs to be taught. It just needs to be resourced and provided even more tools to be able to thrive in that organizing. I would say that, you know, street level is a model of that. You know, although we provide a lot of direct service work, we have found a way to become a hybrid model of also providing a space for advocacy and organizing, and really providing leadership development to day laborers participating and authentically giving them a platform, not just tokenizing them. At times, you know, a lot of work is really tokenizing the stories and taking the stories and the narratives of our community. So I really hope to see the revival of, you know, really true grassroots organizing and going back to those roots. We can look at different examples right here in the Fruitvale, the Chicano movement, Black Panthers, the UFW, but a lot of times organizing is also very glamorized. And we think about just the one individual, right? Like Cesar Chavez or Martin Luther King, but we forget that behind those people, there's a whole movement of people, whether it's the person passing out waters at a rally or handing out a flyer, or, you know, getting people at a house to be able to think about and strategize what's next. So we really also need to see more training of BIPOC organizers, because a lot of times we see a lot of, unfortunately, privileged white people being the organizers of our communities, and we need to see more people like ourselves, and also not reinventing the wheel. There's a lot of learning lessons from past movements, so being able to study those and figure out how can we apply that, but how can we also apply new things. And lastly, I would say just working on dismantling some of these systems, and really community residents being paid to do this work. A lot of times we ask community members to do organizing work for free, and it's not a 9-to-5 job. It's a lifetime to be able to make movements. So that's what I can say about organizing, and I hope that, you know, we can continue to organize together, and, you know, with everyone here today.
Yeah, and this idea that it has to be resourced, right? Like, it deserves to be resourced. It is the way we make change. Sandra, I know that you have a deep history in organizing. You want to talk to us about the tactics that have been most effective in the unincorporated area and kind of seeding in a culture of advocacy that will stick?
Yeah, for us, the most important thing has been the leaders themselves. And so it is not about us as organizers going in and telling them what to say. It's about listening to the community and what they actually need. When the pandemic first hit, we had, you know, some of the highest numbers in the county. I think we had the third highest numbers, and we didn't actually get any COVID funding aside from the county-wide spending. So if you're a city, you get a certain number of dollars for that. And so when the first round came for CARES, we didn't get any of that money. We just got the county-wide. But because residents really organized and mobilized, we were able to get under ARPA, I think, up to 14 million, which is what we would have gotten. And the way that we did that was really empowering residents. We had residents that, you know, went to every meeting and use public comment. We went to all the community groups, because in Unincorporated, you have the MAX and stuff like that, but you also have the community groups, the Ashland Community Association, the Cherryland Community Association, Padres Unidos, SLAM, all these groups. And so they have to go to all these groups and present as part of their community engagement. And we control those groups. Those are our folks. And so we really have to empower those people, teach them how to do this by, you know, giving them leadership skills, by stipending them, by giving them the ability to communicate with their neighbors, because they are the messengers that people in that community are going to trust. So we can come in there, and try to engage residents. But if they have their neighbor telling them that they should get their COVID shot, that this is where they can get food, that this is where they can get tested, they are actually going to listen to them. And it's really important that we recognize the power of neighborhoods, and that there is this untapped potential there that we can tap into to empower folks, to teach them how the system works. Because we say this thing that the system is not broken, it works exactly how it's supposed to. And what that means is that it is complicated and exclusive by design to keep communities of color, to keep people who don't have high levels of education out. And so how do we combat that? Is we teach them how to navigate the system. We just last night we were we finished doing the work around renter protections, but we use that extra time for the items that are not on the agenda and use public comment. We had 10 speakers after 3 hours of a meeting stay on an additional like half an hour to talk about language justice, to ask for translation at every public meeting, Board of Supervisors, all the MACs, Unincorporated Services, BZA, all these millions of meetings that we have to go to. And what happened is by having 10 residents stay on the extra half hour and provide that public comment, we got fast tracked to Unincorporated Services. And now we will very likely have translation at all these meetings, but it's really because people take the time to use the system to get what they want. And that's what really matters, because knowledge is power. And when you empower residents and teach them how to use the system that has kept them out, there's nothing more powerful than that.
Yeah, thank you so much for that success story, Sandra. We're excited about the interpretation. Nestor, what do you think have been some of the successful tactics that you've seen work, especially in South Hayward? And again, returning to this idea of like a culture of advocacy.
Yeah, I think, there are some great points that were made around this sort of around, tactics, organizing, strategies, the idea that learning from our history is super important, right? And so when we think about what I think some of that is lost, right? What was the movement like in the 1970s here in Hayward, for example? What set up La Familia? What set up Tiburcio Vázquez? What set up all of these organizations and institutions? Some of that has been lost, right? And so part of that of historical memory, I think, is a key part of organizing, to say, hey, we did this in the past, and we did it with little to no resources on top of it, right? And so now that we have the resources, that we're able to do it, imagine the things that we can do, right? When we learn about, for example, the Black Panthers who provided free breakfast programs, right? And institutionalized it, right? And so that is some of the things that I think we should be keeping in mind as we think about, how is it that we engage, for example, with City Hall, right? Putting on my public health hat is often we think about, that the city or government has a responsibility, but sometimes the city and government doesn't respond to our needs. And so we have to build the alternative outside of it, right? And it doesn't mean we ignore City Hall. It doesn't mean we don't engage with City Hall, but it means that we attempt to build what is needed for our community from the community, right? From the bottom up. And with that said, I think, for example, the young folks in Hayward are doing some incredible work, right? There's a small little organization that has popped up just in the last year or two by the name of the Hayward Community Coalition, and they've been pushing hard. And one of the things that has come out of that process is this participatory budgeting process, right? Which is the people's budget, which is underway. It has its limitations. It's more of a grant program at the moment than a truly participatory budgeting process. But it sets it in motion to have an authentic process in which community can have a say over how the budget is decided. And I think that's in some ways revolutionary, and we're not the first place to do it, right? It's been done in South America, it's been done in New York, it's being done in Vallejo, right? And so these are some of the ways in which we can begin thinking about, okay, the difference between advocacy and organizing, right? Because organizing gets the goods. And I'll leave it at that.
Organizing gets the goods. I like it. So we are going to turn to our last question for each of you. And this one, I love this one. We have a captive audience present, and many of these folks are in positions of power to make decisions around funding and policy. So my question is, what does success look like for you, and how can meaningful change be achieved? And Sandra, we're going to ask you to start us off on this one.
I think that for us, it's very much tied to money, right? We did this, we watched the video around zip codes, and in unincorporated, zip codes matter a lot, actually, so much, because we don't actually have our own zip codes. So in the Cherryland area, a lot of the zip codes belong to the city of Hayward, and in Ashland, they go towards the city of San Leandro, which means they actually get our dollars, because a lot of the way the money is divvied up is by zip code. And when you don't exist on that plane, you don't exist when the dollars come in. And so what success looks like for me is maybe some zip code realignment, which means that unincorporated areas have their own zip codes where they can generate tax funds to actually fund the things that they need in their cities, like sidewalks, like services, like plumbing, like street cleaning, all these things that we take for granted. And so having some of those basic structures that we need is really important. So having line items in the county budget that are specifically for unincorporated is what success looks like for me. Having someone at the county level that only deals with unincorporated, that is our representative that we can call, is what success looks like for me. And funding and empowering these community-based organizations that do the legwork is what success looks like for me, because I think Gabriela said it right. We ask a lot of our residents. I think the residents that work with me here know that. I call them all the time for a million things. I think this is like our 4th meeting this week, you know, with some of these folks. And so they deserve to be compensated for their time. And we deserve as organizations to have the resources to do the work. And that is what success looks like for me. Put your money where your mouth is and support us.
Yeah, definitely. I heard someone earlier say these organizations are trying to do $500,000 goals on $20,000 of foundation funding. And that spoke to me. So Nestor, we're going to ask you to weigh in.
This one is a difficult question, because I think success, right? It's like, how is it that we're framing it? How is it that we're measuring what success is? You know, I think what I would love to see in Hayward is especially in South Hayward, is the connection of these different struggles, right? And sort of, I'd love to see, for example, an emergence of an environmental justice movement in Hayward, right? And so success to me is that we're passing on, Sandra said it really, really well, right? That we're passing on the baton, right, of leadership to these newer generations of young people who are willing to take on the fight, right? Because I know that we're not going to see them in my lifetime, and I'm not that old, right? And so that struggle needs to happen and needs to be continued and be passed on. So that success, right, is the success of how is it that we're, you know, fomenting and building upon that sort of collective struggle, and also that collective historical memory, right? How is it that we're sort of making sure that that's being passed on? How is it that, are we centering our elders in this process, right? Will our young folks be able to learn from that, the struggle that they've engaged in? You know, there's an expression that's used in Latin America around, you know, putting my public health hat back on, around el poder de la vida, right? The translation is the power of life, right? And so if we're centering life, you know, then we can begin to determine what are those successes, right? If we're centering those who are the most marginalized, the most vulnerable, right? Those people who are unsheltered, those people who are out of work, right? And we're centering them, then we can begin to start talking about success. But so I may be overthinking the question a little bit too much, but that's how I'm gonna leave it at that.
I think that was a perfect response. All right, Gabby, you get to finish up the panel.
Sounds great. So success for me really looks like organizing myself out of a job. And what I mean by that was, something that I think is true to street level is that we want to say that one day we don't exist, not because, we went away in a negative way or because funding was lost, but really that we did our job to be able to provide the tools to the community. And what that really looks like is long-term investment of BIPOC communities, these neighborhoods, the much needed resources, dollars, and funding creative and new ideas and up and coming organizations. I think a lot of times, there's like over and over the list of organizations that get funded and those that are, have to prove their way to get there, right? And so we need to do away with that infrastructure and really provide funding for general operations, funding pilot programs, and being able to work with the neighborhoods and coming down, and politicians and people in government coming to the actual neighborhood, talking to residents and having bi-directional feedback mechanisms, not just these surveys, like you said, Jennifer, but really having conversations, authentic conversations where residents can voice what they need and vice versa. And to be honest, a 1 to 2 year grant at $10,000, $50,000 is not going to change. It's not going to create social justice movement. So we really need to put dollars behind it. The last thing I would say is really transparency. As talking about Resilient Fruitvale and working in collaboratives, we were a bold coalition that came out in December 2020 to the county and asking for $70 million because that's what we believe the community needed at that time to be able to fund these resources that are, the community was asking us for. But, we haven't really seen a lot of transparency of where those dollars are at. And we really, as community residents, need to know where our dollars are going to, because all of us, whether regardless of status, are paying taxes, and this is our money. So we need to know where it's at. So I think just being able to have more transparency in these conversations and the money flowing faster to these communities, because by the time the money comes out, there's something new that we have to deal with. So just, recognizing the last thing is that there's a lot of communities that live in the shadows, like the unhoused, the undocumented, and making sure that when programming and funding is built, that it also includes them as well.
Yes, I can't imagine a better note to end on. So I'm going to ask the audience to join with me to celebrate these panelists. I am so grateful that we got to share this time together. And I think that every single person on this call is walking away with something real. And that is due to the three of you. And so I'm really grateful.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, so I have just a couple more thoughts. One last thought for thanking the panelists, not only their wisdom, but their experience and the fact that they do this every day, right? And like they said, organizing is not just a 9-to-5 job, right? It's messy into the evenings, the meetings go till 10:30, it's on the weekends, you're at everywhere, right? And so I'm grateful for the people who do this work every day as part of their mission life, honestly. So make sure you're thanking them in the chat, make sure you're doing shout outs and emojis and all that good stuff. So a couple things. We've come close to the end of our event, and we are consciously building a feedback culture here at La Familia. And so we are asking you to spend 3 minutes doing a survey. I know I said no more surveys. 3 minutes doing a survey to tell us what we could have done better, right? Because we want to continue to grow. We want to continue to amplify local voices about the things that matter to them. So that survey is going to be dropped in the chat right now. Please tell us 3 minutes to tell us what you think. Also, at La Familia, we're trying to cultivate an appreciation culture. And so I want to thank all of our speakers, all of our participants. I want to thank each and every one of you. I'm seeing 130 people on this call right now, so thank you. And I want to thank the strategy and development team here at La Familia who worked on this event. And that's especially our partner relations manager, Sofia Rodriguez, who was our lead on this event. So thank you so much to all of you. And now, we have come to, I know, I should have given more time for applause, more appreciation. Come on, there we go. All right, so we have come to the call for action, or the call to action, because we are organizers and we love calls to action, and we love helping people find a meaningful role in our movement. And now you are in our movement. And here is the task. The task is to use this language, placemaking, structural barriers, local power. Talk about place and what makes our communities different and unique. Remember that one size fits all fits nobody, and that better than it was still isn't good enough. The future is informed by the narratives and the ideas and the power of the people who actually live in these neighborhoods. And if you choose to accept it, you can be their ally in the future. Place matters. Thank you and good night.